Not in the histories. I'm 44 years old, and in my 44 years, we've never had a flu this bad that has completely shut down the entire world. From a retail point of view, from a logistical standpoint of view, it's never happened, not once.
Hey friends, that was the voice of Russ, a supply chain and logistics expert, and he reached out to me to give us the inside skinny on what's really going on globally, and it's not good. For those of you who still need storable food, use my friends over at My Patriot Supply, and you can use the link below this video, preparewithsgtreport.com, to save 40% on your 2-week or 4-week emergency food supply. This extremely high quality storable food is grown and packed in the United States and includes 16 food varieties and up to a 25-year shelf life. So I'll leave the link below. I won't bore you with any more details, but know this: the delivery time was guaranteed at 2 days, and that is now expanding because supplies are running out. So get your emergency food supplies and plan ahead while you can. Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report. Thanks for coming back. Unfortunately, the news is not good. It's getting worse by the minute. The stock markets are an absolute horror show. Of course, you guys know that today the S&P extended losses after reopening, down 8.5%. Europe stocks crashing by the most ever. There's a temporary hold on cash markets. People are really starting to panic. I have on the line somebody who reached out to me. His name is Russ. He's a logistics specialist. In fact, he owns a small company in the 3PO space. Russ, do you want to explain to people what that means, the 3PO space?
3PL is a third-party logistics. We're otherwise known as brokers. We've been predominantly taking over the scene as far as arranging the freight from place to place globally. It's been increasing, pretty much in the market year after year, as companies get rid of their own employees that might have handled the freight or logistics on a regular scale, and they pretty much leave it up to us, the brokers.
And the reason you reached out is because you've got some information that you're privy to that the rest of us really don't know. Now, my wife and my daughter were in a Target last night, and all the toilet paper was gone, and all of the canned fruit was gone. So the retail customer is really starting to react to this thing, and they're trying to stock their pantry in case we all have to shelter in place. What are you seeing? Now, you also probably saw that I shared some of that dock footage from, I believe it was one of the California ports.
Yes.
No activity in that port at all. And you say that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that would be the Port of Long Beach, which is pretty much the second busiest port in the country. What we're looking at right now, the video that was shown with the woman, the truck driver, and she was showing the empty containers. That is pretty much what the scene is looking like globally right now. I have a lot of clients that import, different types of items, specifically machinery from countries like China, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. The gentleman that I regularly work with that deals with quite a bit of military shipments, the only country right now that was shipping anything was Taiwan. And he said at this point, it's even spotty on that because a lot of the freight that goes through Maersk actually has to go through China. So a lot of the shipments that, even though they have the capability of producing the machinery, they're not able to move it anywhere. It's basically stuck.
All right, so now we're seeing things like Major League Baseball may delay the start of their 2020 season. I believe I heard last night that the NBA has canceled their season.
I think as of right now, it's being temporarily postponed. I don't think they've upgraded it to being canceled. I was watching actually some news earlier today that it tended to seem like it was up in the air regarding the playoffs and everything. Now, I do actually handle the freight for the NFL draft every year. As of right now, the NFL draft has not canceled. That's still up in the air. It's still a little bit of ways off. But with other events like Ultra Fest in Miami and South by Southwest in Austin, Coachella being postponed, I would expect a lot of other major events around the country being postponed as well.
All right. Well, what's your feeling on this thing just from an economic perspective? I've said a million times before, I'll say it again. I never, ever, ever wanted an economic collapse. I've been talking about the possibility of it happening in this country, but I never wanted it because I told people it would be much, much worse than they understand. Add to that a pandemic, and it's really the sum of all fears as far as I can make it out to be. And you still have people in the space saying, oh, this whole thing's a hoax. There's no pandemic. There's no problem. It's just a common cold.
Well, to give you a little bit of background on myself, from a young age, I worked for a major grocery store chain in the Southeast called Public Supermarkets. I worked there for 10 years, got up into management. So I have a very, very good perspective on the retail sector. After that, I worked in banking as both a commercial banker and analyst for two of the top 10 banks in the country. And since 2010, I've been in logistics, owning my own company since 2016. So when you kind of tie all the three in together, the things that I've learned, my biggest, I guess, my awake moment was back in 2006 when I saw Ken Lewis, the former CEO of Bank of America, selling $330 million worth of stock. Um, and then basically from there, I kind of started waking up to seeing how things were really going on. Remembering back to when I was in retail, we were always told to keep the shelves full nonstop. They had to be packed full. Uh, Looking at the shelves, even prior to this whole coronavirus scare, they have been moderately kept. So typically, let's say you have a shelf space that holds 48 boxes of rice. Back in the 90s and up through maybe even the early 2000s, that shelf would be jam packed full. Now, since the on demand computer systems have come into play, that actual space has been dwindled down to about 50%. What we're seeing right now in the market, I actually just got off the phone earlier this morning with a buyer from Costco that was advising me out of the orders that they were able to place, they were only able to fill 45% of those orders. So we're starting to see basically the entire supply chain break down as a whole. A lot of people don't realize, you can make the chemical for, say, like Procter and Gamble. They're experiencing extremely large disruptions right now. If you look at the picture that I sent you, uh, I believe that was store 3 and store 1 and store 2. Those are all sections in a moderate county with probably around 500,000 people. In the particular city that I'm in, we have probably a population of about 50,000 people. You're roughly looking at 3 super Walmarts, a couple super Targets, and probably roughly around 50 actual stores, regular grocery store chains. So when you're looking at like this picture here, this is the bleach section completely wiped out. There was another section like the cleaning supplies completely wiped out. I saw the sugar wiped out. The actual shelf space, I would say, for canned goods was only stocked at probably, I would say, 15% of capacity. And I've been going in regularly every single night trying to, get an eye on things and gauge what's going on. And what the biggest shocker that I'm really seeing is that as of right now, it appears that some of the major grocery retailers are actually diverting stock from rural communities. I've actually got a family member that is a rep at a company, and he's been sending me photos of some of the Walmarts in his area. And they've even resorted to putting plastic storage bins in all the empty shelf spaces to make them look full, which is actually kind of a little bit ridiculous, trying to make people feel like things are okay. But like I said, the spray bottles, what you're looking at, like say a bottle of Fantastic. Well, the chemical might be made in the US, but the actual components that make the bottle could be made in an entirely different country. Well, if you don't have the components to make the bottles, you can't bottle the product and you can't put it on the shelf. And that's what we're actually starting to see right now is all of these components that come together to make the products that we as consumers buy are running out.
So, do you think that they are diverting product away from rural communities to try to keep cities stocked? Because obviously, if people in the cities start to panic, then all bets are off.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think personally is going on because I was very curious. Like I said, my cousin lives in more of a rural part of the country, and he's been sending me regular pictures on a regular basis from different big box stores around the country. And the stock levels are completely different. Now, as I expected, the big box stores were getting cleaned out first, the Costco, Sam's Clubs, Walmart's, Targets. And once those are depleted, you're going to start seeing the regular grocery stores like the Kroger's, the Publix, the S&Ps, and all those other places, get completely cleaned out as well. If you actually go into the stores and you look at the shelves, they're doing what's called front facing. That's where they bring everything to the front of the shelf to make it look full. on a regular basis. And like I said, back in the 90s, that would not be the case. You know, the shelves would be jam packed. So not only are we running out of the actual items to make the components, but the warehouses are running dry. Like I said, when a Costco warehouse can't fulfill only 45% of its orders, you know something is really awry out there.
Well, I just typed in empty shelves, and so far it's mostly toilet paper that people are afraid they're going to run out of. Um, if they don't get this thing under control, and I'm talking about the virus, why don't you play out for us a worst case scenario over just the next 60 days? God forbid this thing go on for 6 months.
Well, I just actually saw a news article. I guess Norway actually has completely shut down their country now, which just came out not too long ago. So I think what we're going to start seeing here is more countries are going to start putting up walls. Now, as that happens, that's obviously, of course, going to pretty much at this point start breaking down the supply chain even more. You got to, people have to look at the grand scheme of things. I think at the time of this starting, China made up about 31% of the global manufacturing. Then you add into that South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, Italy now. I mean, just those countries alone, you're looking at probably close to 40% of the global manufacturing. With the ban on Europe, the big thing there is I know they're still trying to work out trade deals, and how to, you know, how are they going to go about doing that? Because an average cruise ship takes anywhere between 30 to 45 days to travel from Europe to the United States. And that's pretty much about the average all over the world. And a lot of people are under the presumption that, oh, well, the virus cannot, you know, withstand 30 to 45 days. But you also have to remember that's 30 to 45 days out in the sunlight. These containers, some of them are beneath deck and they have moisture temperatures and, you know, other things that the viruses could actually probably live longer on. So apart from just letting the stuff set in ports and having tests come out, you know, actual people to come out and test the containers to see if there's any viral, you know, remnants left on them or whatever the case might be, who knows? I had a conference last week and one actually on Monday with some other agencies that I work with. And we were actually trying to delve into the grand scope of things about how this is going to affect the broader spectrum of how long will it last, how long is it going to take to reboot. Typically, most warehouses, especially grocery warehouses, are also on demand as well. So we see not only the grocery stores, but the warehouses on demand. With that, keeping that in mind, only a certain percentage of products can be fully made in our country. So if they don't figure out some solution with the trade aspect of it, our initial thought was by mid-April, we were going to start seeing quite a bit more items just completely dropping off the spectrum. And it's looking like it could potentially happen sooner than that now. So once the logistics system goes down, you could be looking, our initial thought was probably 3 to 6 months for it to come back up on, you know, to return to full normal. But as each country shuts down, as you know, sector shuts down, you're adding on another month to 2 months. So that 3 to 6 months is now gone from 6 months to a year, depending on how things cycle. Now, the other thing that we were discussing is, well, what if the virus goes south for, you know, the summer and then returns back in the fall? Then you're just basically restarting that scope all over again. So realistically, from a, you know, they're talking about a vaccine 18 months away or whatever the case might be. You could be looking at anywhere between 6 months up to 18 months of complete supply chain disruption, which means you're looking at another 3 to 6 months after that, roughly, before they can get things back to normal, because manufacturers are down, the ports are all backed up. You know, what do they decide? What gets shipped first? It's just basically a logistical nightmare, if you will.
Hmm. Did you happen to hear that clip that I played from Bill Ryan? It was recorded in 2010. It was published to YouTube. And he was quoting a whistleblower that was privy to some meetings in the city of London in 2005. And the whistleblower told him that they were going to release a bioweapon against China and China would catch a cold. They said this in 2005. It's happened now here in 2020. What is your view? I'm asking you to speculate. Is this thing what I think it is, or is it just not quite as bad and the world is overreacting?
From what I've read and what I've seen, and I've actually got a lot of contacts in China that I've spoken with directly from the supply chain side. And every single person that I was able to talk to, one of them I was only able to talk to on a satellite phone because they had the cell phones completely blocked. He told me that this was nothing like the flu, nothing whatsoever like the flu. And this guy is he's in his early 50s, and he did end up actually contracting it. And he was outside of Wuhan. He was just a little bit north of Hong Kong, and he basically felt like, he said the way he described it to me was someone was reaching inside his chest and ripping out his lungs, was exactly what he described it to me. So me personally, based on all the information I've seen and everything that I've read, I know there was that one professor, I believe, that has come out. I forget his name.
Professor Boyle?
Yes, Professor Boyle.
Francis
I've,
Boyle?
yeah, I've been really looking into his information and about the published information on the group that he believes had actually, made this virus, so to speak. And basically, the scary thing of it is that I believe in his interview he ended up stating that they were unable to find an antibody, which is kind of the really scary part. And if it's just like the flu, not in the histories. I'm 44 years old, and in my 44 years, we've never had a flu this bad that has completely shut down the entire world. From a retail point of view, from a logistical standpoint of view, it's never happened, not once.
My gut tells me, and I could be wrong, but my gut tells me that this was done on purpose because the powers that be in the city of London saw the world getting just a little too out of control for their liking, right? Brexit, Trump 2020, Trump pulling out of the Paris Accords, no carbon taxes for the bankers. And keep in mind, if any group, no matter how big or small, if any group knew this was going to happen, they're making trillions of dollars by going short on the markets. They knew exactly where this thing was headed a month ago, a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago. They could have been positioning themselves. And it just seems to me that that's what they do time and time again. They run these markets up, they profit, and then when the markets crash, they profit on the way down. I don't mean to overstate it, but they really have us by the balls with this one. If this thing is not brought to a swift end, we're going to see an economic collapse with potentially a pandemic that's hurting and that's injuring and potentially killing people around you. And Russ, to me, that is the worst case scenario. That is the sum of all fears.
Well, the things that I started noticing, if you bring up the pictures, the mill 1, mill 2, and mill 3, if you bring up mill 1 first, this is actually a customer of mine that specifically ships to the military. So if you look there, if you go back to the one from January 1st, 2017, right there. So this is a regular guy that pretty much ships machines just to the military. Now, if you look here in 2017, very nominal. It wasn't, not anything to brag about. Now, if you bump up to 2018, you'll see that it tripled. And if you bump up to 2019, you'll see that it stayed on pace with 2018. So these were shipments all going to military bases, and the type of machinery that they're shipping are basically metalworking machines, things that can be used to make components and everything. Now, initially, I didn't think anything of it at first because I knew, obviously, Trump had said they were going to be spending more money on the military. 2018 was an interesting year in the freight and logistics world. We saw freight expenditures go through the roof in 2018. Drivers could pretty much name their rates. Now, a lot of people were floating around how a lot of companies were trying to get in product before the potential tariffs hit. And now I'm starting to see otherwise. I'm starting to see and think that whether some people were privy to what was going on or they knew there was not going to be a trade deal, which I always thought in my mind, I was always under the assumption there was never going to be a trade deal with China. They were bringing in product like unbelievable amounts on a regular basis throughout the entire year, and it did not stop all of 2018. It didn't actually slow down a little bit until March of 2019, and then the rest of 2019, it kind of dropped back to normal levels. We saw record years since we've started our company, 30 to 50% increases every year, not just because we were a new company, but a lot of this stuff was coming in from the ports. I had a lead manufacturer shipping in literally truckloads, dozens of truckloads of lead from Mexico, going to Arizona on a weekly basis. And this was just something at the time that was unheard of. They didn't move that much raw lead on a regular basis at the levels that they were doing. So my assumption is that not only was the military preparing for this, obviously, Trump said he wanted to do away with a lot of the parts and stuff being manufactured in other countries because it is a security and liability issue for our country, which kind of shows them purchasing the new machinery. But I think it's because they knew there was going to be a disruption in the supply chain. China, you can pull up article after article after article of the military and the government outsourcing manufacturing of military goods, all kinds of things from China. There was even one circumstance, I think there was a company that was making different types of night vision or lenses or something like that. And when the military had got them, when they booted them up, the menu came up in Chinese and they were supposed to be made in the United States. So there's all kinds of stuff like that going on. Companies making stuff in China, passing it off as being made into the U.S., made in the U.S. and then selling it to the government like that. So I think two things. One, the government was stockpiling machinery because they knew that the supply chain, there was going to be a large interruption in it. And they needed to have access to make those little parts that, they might have to order from somewhere else. So that's kind of what I'm seeing with the grocery supply chain. Like I said, by mid-April, we're going to start seeing quite a bit more things besides toilet paper and cleaning supplies coming off the shelf. You're going to start seeing a lot more than that. And with the horrible crop yields we've had the last 2 years, I've seen videos of people in India fighting over onions. The sugar beet harvest was absolutely horrid. So we're going to start seeing shortages of everything. It's just they can't keep up with the demand and with the crop shortages. And now we've got the supply chain interruptions. It's pretty much what's going to be in the stores is going to be there. I could seriously see people when things start running out going to a barter system, trading things for, say, hey, I'll trade you a roll of Clorox wipes for, I don't know, maybe a bag of beans or something like that.
Well, the impact is just not able to be overstated. So Italy is suspending mortgage payments to try to give people a little bit of relief because obviously if you have to shelter in place, you can't go to work, your employer can't pay you after a certain amount of time. I mean, how are people going to get paid? How are people going to make a living? How are people?
Yeah, the payroll tax that Trump was proposing, I thought that is kind of a little bit absurd because if people are getting laid off and they're not working, what good is a payroll tax reduction going to do?
Right. It helps the employer, not the person.
Right.
The bazooka fired Fed unleashes $1.5 trillion repo bailout. So, of course, what do we see? More money for the banks that are struggling, right? They're going to fire hose money at the banks, but not we the people. It happened in 2008. It's always happened. This is just the way it is, and it really, really stinks. Well, Russ, I appreciate your time. Anything else you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I would just advise people if, with things the way they're looking, if there's anything that, you can possibly think of that you might need, not necessarily just on the food side, but on the clothing side as well. You think of all the clothing that's manufactured overseas and everything else. I would get it now. I would get it now because, again, the shelves are going to start clearing out come mid-April. They already have been on a lot of things, and it's just going to get worse.
All right. Well, thanks for reaching out. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, you bet. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sorry the news isn't better, but we'll keep our eye on this story, of course. And for real news 24/7, you guys can visit us directly at sgtreport.com. God bless. Bye-bye.
$5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours, the world economy would have collapsed.